It seems that the flying spaghetti monster and its followers are starting to gain a bit of traction in Germany, or at least they're getting more attention in the media these days. Recently, in the federal state of Brandenburg, members of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, who also call themselves Pastafarians, demanded that they be allowed to post official signs in town announcing the time and location of their masses, just like the Protestant and Catholic churches and other religious groups. Since reading about the issue in Brandenburg online, I've also heard a few discussions about the Flying Spaghetti Monster around Lüneburg. The Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster first emerged in the United States in 2005 as a protest against the teaching of creationism and intelligent design in public schools. The basic idea was that if creationism and intelligent design were to receive equal time in public education as the natural sciences, as some fundamentalist Christians were demanding, then by the same logic, so should belief in a flying spaghetti monster. And thus a movement was born. Pastafarians often dress like pirates and gather together on a regular basis to eat pasta and drink beer. They also claim that heaven contains a beer volcano and a stripper factory. Exactly what it sounds like. Which certainly makes for a compelling eschatology, to say the least. There's no question about whether Pastafarians have a good time together and whether Pastafarianism also serves the function of a religious community for many of its adherents. It clearly does. All in all, it appears that the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster quite successfully combines a mix of satire with serious social political claims to the same basic rights as other religious groups. I certainly don't question whether people ought not to be able to dress like pirates, wear colanders on their head, say ramen instead of amen, and hold spaghetti masses. But the question of whether a modern Western state such as Germany or America is obliged to give Pastafarians the same privileges and protections as traditional religious groups is an important and still open question, and one that will have an impact on how we arrange our conceptual categories in the near future, particularly those of state and church, secular and sacred, religion, and the public sphere. In essence, the basic Pastafarian position seems to me to be that religious beliefs and practices are based on nothing but an assertion about the existence of a divine being that cannot be verified by modern science and is therefore incapable of being proven. Since religious beliefs and practices ultimately derive from nothing other than an unverifiable assertion, then the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and, say, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Germany, the EKD, are essentially just two different versions of the same thing, at least as far as their conceptual foundations go. Some members of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster explicitly state that their beliefs are, in fact, serious, and their practices, therefore, legitimate expressions of their beliefs. I have no need to question the sincerity of those beliefs here, but what I do want to question is the underlying notion that religions and their gods are in fact based on sheer, unprovable assertions, and whether this kind of claim about religion as a human phenomenon can actually bear the weight of contemporary scientific and academic scrutiny. If anything, modern science increasingly shows us that religion has been with humanity for a very long time, certainly as long as behaviorally modern humans have been around. And there's increasing reason to believe that other hominins, such as the Neanderthals, may also have had some forms of religious practice. With respect to modern Homo sapiens, it therefore seems increasingly impossible to give an account of our cognitive development as a species without including the influence of something like religion. And this in turn implicates the physical development of our brains. Thus, rather than being something purely extrinsic that we humans can shed once we've outgrown it, like an unprovable assertion about possible gods, religion rather appears to be very much an intrinsic part of human nature that has not only shaped the development of our minds and cultures, but also our biological nature as well. If human beings do somehow grow out of religion, as some people believe and hope we will, then what it means to be human will have to be fundamentally different than what it is today, and has been for the last 40,000 years. And this will be a biological fact. But these rather material implications about the substantive nature of homo religiosus receive additional reinforcement with even a superficial glance at Western culture. There is very little of anything in modern Western culture that has not been shaped by the influence of religion in at least some way. Islamic, Christian, and Jewish scholarship is largely responsible for the early development of the modern natural and human sciences in the West, the preservation and reintroduction of not only classical Latin and Greek languages, but also the works of Plato, Aristotle, and many others as well. Most of these texts were preserved by monks and religious scholars who spent time copying, translating, annotating, and interpreting ancient works. And not just philosophy and theology, but everything from biology, drama, mathematics, and medicine to zoology. This mediation, translation, and commentary on ancient scholarship was itself the development of the modern European university system. When the work of copying text shifted from the pens of monks to the printing press around the time of the Reformation, the more ready availability of religious tracts in the Bible gave more people than ever a reason to become literate, both in Latin and in the vernacular of their regions. The modern German language was particularly influenced by these developments, and well into the 20th century, one of the most important defenses in the fight against illiteracy in the West has been the ubiquitous presence of the Bible. Beyond that, the basis of the modern legal and justice systems, the ones to which the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster explicitly makes appeal, is incomprehensible without the moral and legal codes of the Old Testament and other religious documents, as well as the Western tradition of canon law that in part led to the development of the modern Western legal system and political science. The fact that we can even have a conceptual discussion about the relationship between church and state and secular and religious matters is a direct result of the efforts of Christian theologians and canon lawyers. Religion, of course, has had and still has its bad sides, including its involvement in wars, violence, corruption, slavery, and oppression. But I think the weight of all this evidence demonstrates that what makes a religion and what fills out human claims about gods are not simply just formal assertions about their existence, whether they're made of noodles or not. Religions rather have something very much like a living body, and without this body, its biological, spatial, temporal, and intellectual characteristics, religions and their gods would certainly be nothing other than a hollow set of ideas. In conclusion, I don't think there's any question about whether certain basic rights ought to extend to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and Pastafarians. But when it comes to determining whether the Flying Spaghetti Monster has what it takes to be a god, and whether Pastafarianism can ever rightly take its place in the pantheon of religions, the proof will be in the pudding. Or perhaps it's better to say in this case, in the pasta. Thank you.